This morning, higher than normal rejections of mail-in ballot applications. In some counties, nearly 50% were denied. Travis County Judge Andy Brown weighs in on what he says is voter suppression. Also, campaign finance reports are in. Beto O'Rourke called in $7.2 million in 46 days, and Governor Abbott has $65 million in the bank. Can Beto close the fundraising gap? We'll ask ABC's political director, Rick Klein. Also, the FBI raids Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar's home. Authorities call it a court-authorized ongoing investigation. What will it mean for Cuellar's re-election campaign? And are state officials trying to wrestle local control away from Texas's cities and counties? Judges Glenn Whitley and Eddie Trevino are on this week's episode of Yolitics.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good morning and hello, Texans across the state. I'm David Schechter filling in for Jason Whiteley. Let's get rolling with the week's big political headlines from across Texas. Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller has cut ties with a top aide who's been indicted for allegedly profiting off licenses issued by the Ag Department. The Travis County District Attorney says Todd Smith took up to $150,000 in bribes from farmers in exchange for state licenses to produce hemp. Smith was a top political consultant to Miller, and those licenses were issued through Commissioner Miller's office. Smith's lawyer says he is innocent. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, a vocal opponent of federal vaccine mandates, has tested positive for COVID-19. His office confirmed Wednesday that he has the coronavirus and is isolating at home. No other information was released regarding his symptoms, when he received that positive result, or if he is vaccinated. And the U.S. Supreme Court has rejected the latest attempt to block the Texas abortion law. The law bans abortions about 6 weeks into pregnancy and allows citizens to file lawsuits against abortion providers. Thursday, the High Court refused to send that legal challenge back to a federal district judge for further consideration. That could mean the Supreme Court will take up the issue itself, which it has so far declined to do. You know, counties across Texas are rejecting mail-in ballot applications at much higher rates than normal. It is the result of a new Republican-backed law which changed the way that ballot applications are filled out. So far, Travis County has denied about 50% of the applications it's received. Travis County Judge Andy Brown says the changes are confusing voters, and he says this is not about election integrity, it's about voter suppression.
Judge Brown, thanks for being with us today. What's the status of the rejection of the mail-in ballots in Travis County in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you know, SB1 passed and has frankly made it a lot more confusing and challenging for people to request vote by mail ballots. And, you know, the Secretary of State had a long time to figure out this process. And now that people are starting to apply, we're seeing that basically about 50% of the people who applied here in Travis County, I believe that's the case in other counties as well, are not meeting the criteria and therefore would be rejected. I think that the county clerk here, Dana DeBeauvoir, is waiting for further guidance from the Secretary of State to see if that number can be reduced. It sounds like there may be ways to do that, but in the end, it's confusing people. And even if they solve a big part of these rejections, my understanding is still there will be about 15% or so fewer people that meet the criteria and can vote by mail.
Isn't it expected, I guess, when you roll out any kind of new policy that would essentially cover the entire state, everyone is registered to vote, that there would be some problems off the top?
Yeah, I guess so. But the question is, you know, why do you want to make it harder for people to vote in the state of Texas? And especially, why do you want to make it harder for people to vote by mail? And that's clearly what has happened at the statewide level. And we're trying to do our best here in Travis County to frankly combat that, make it as easy as possible for people to vote. But we still have to follow these new changes to the state laws. So we're trying to accommodate as best we can.
Some people have called this voter suppression. Do you use those terms? And if you do, why?
Yeah, I do. I don't think there's any real controversy to it, because it is literally making it harder for people to, in this case, request a mail ballot, which is something that people have done for years and years, especially people over 65. And that's the same group that we're noticing is now being rejected at a very high rate, up to maybe 50%, because they're doing things like maybe putting their driver's license number on it instead of the last four of their social, or vice versa. And frankly, it shouldn't, there's no reason to have made the changes that the state leadership made if their goal was not to suppress the vote. And so I think just the fact that 50% of the vote by mail applications that we received so far have been rejected according to the state's criteria, or should be rejected according to the state's criteria, that's too many for me. And it's frankly, with all the other problems that we have with COVID, I think there's a lot of ways that we need to be working together as a society, trying to make things easier for folks, including in the voting arena. And vote by mail it's safe, it's easy, it's legal. We should be promoting it, making it as easy as possible, especially for our seniors here in Travis County.
Do you see a remedy to this problem? Because legislatively, at least, it doesn't appear to be that there's any way to address this issue today.
Yeah, overall, no, I think it's a bad law and should not have been passed. But given that it is a bad law and we have to live under it, I think my understanding is if people put both their driver's license number and the last four of their social, and then there's an additional box to check that had not been on past forms, that could help with this overall. And so, yeah, so we're encouraging people as they fill out these vote by mail requests to definitely put their driver's license, last four of social, and make sure that they've checked all the boxes that apply.
Judge Andy Brown, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Anytime.
On Wednesday, the FBI raided Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar's home and campaign office. According to reports, agents removed boxes from his Laredo home and were present at a downtown building that Cuellar owns. The FBI would only say that they were conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity. First elected in 2004, Cuellar is an influential congressman from South Texas. His district includes San Antonio and Laredo. So what does this investigation mean for Cuellar and for his reelection? It seems like a good question for Ross Ramsey, co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune, who joins us now. Ross, what do you know about the raid, and what do we know about what this says about Cuellar and his reelection?
Well, good morning. The first thing we don't know is what the raid was about. We don't know what the FBI is up to. They haven't said. Cuellar hasn't said. His first level problem is that the FBI is on the front lawn. The second level problem is the timing of this. Cuellar's in a tough primary against Jessica Cisneros, a woman he beat by only 3.5 percentage points in the Democratic primary in 2020. And now she's got something to talk about. In fact, she sent out a mailer to potential supporters on the heels of this news that basically had the headline and said, we've got to talk to Henry about what he's been doing.
All right, let's move on to one other issue. Bastrop County just dealt with some pretty scary urban wildfires. It started by the Texas Parks and Wildlife, they were doing a controlled burn. It got out of hand. There were road closures, evacuations. It was not a good look for the state. Do you think there's some political fallout around something like this that just did not go as it was supposed to go?
I think there probably is in Bastrop. It helps on that score anyway, that no homes were burned down, nobody was hurt. As you said, a lot of people were evacuated and inconvenienced, and they got PTSD. Bastrop had terrible fires a few years ago, and a lot of people immediately flashed back to that. So it's, as you said, not a good look. I don't know that it'll have political repercussions.
Okay, Ross, thanks for that, and we'll see you at the end of the show here. Beto O'Rourke hauled in millions of dollars in the month and a half after announcing he was running for governor, but Governor Greg Abbott has a huge war chest. Can Beto O'Rourke close the money gap? ABC's political director, Rick Klein, he's up next. And are state officials overreaching by trying the local policies of cities and counties? Judge Glenn Whitley and Eddie Trevino are on this week's episode of Y'all It Takes. It's likely that Democrat Beto O'Rourke and Republican Greg Abbott will face each other this fall in the governor's race, and the latest campaign finance reports show both are formidable fundraisers. O'Rourke raised $7.2 million in the first 46 days of his campaign, and Abbott collected $18.9 million over the last 6 months, with a total of $65 million on hand. For context on what this means, I checked in with Rick Klein. He's the political director for ABC News. What's your take on the new numbers?
Those are eye-popping numbers in both parties, and I think it's fair to say that money will be no object in the gubernatorial race in Texas. In the case of Beto O'Rourke, you have someone who has a proven ability to excite donors nationally and in the state of Texas. He's already run statewide. He's already run nationally. He's got a deep bench of people that are willing and able to contribute money. And we're seeing in Greg Abbott just an absolute juggernaut of fundraising, someone that goes into a pivotal reelection race with all the resources and then some that he will need. And I think it's going to be a year of a lot of ads, a lot of excitement, and a lot of big spending in both parties.
In 2018, that election, I believe, was a $92 million between Beto O'Rourke and Senator Ted Cruz. Do you think we'll be seeing that kind of money in Texas for the governorship?
I think it's very conceivable that we're going to blow past any record that stood before in terms of spending for a statewide race, governor or for Senate. Texas is a very expensive state to run in because of all the different media markets. You have to have a different ad strategy in Dallas versus Houston versus San Antonio or El Paso. So that I think demands bigger resources. But I think in this case, as in that Senate race that you referenced, you've just got national ambitions colliding with the stakes that everyone is very familiar with. Democrats have been targeting Texas for a long time. A lot of national excitement about the possibility of challenging Governor Abbott. A lot of people think Greg Abbott's got his eyes on running for president at some point in the future. Beto O'Rourke already ran for president at some point in the not so distant past. So I think the combination of forces means that you could blow past every record that's ever held.
I think the headline of this has been O'Rourke raises $7.2 million in 46 days, but really, with $65 million in the bank for Abbott, that's 9 times more money. Is that a gap that can possibly be closed?
It's astounding to think about, but it seems likely that Beto O'Rourke is not going to have the same resources as Greg Abbott. And I think there's a couple factors at play. One is Abbott's had a big head start on doing this, even though he only recently announced for re-election. He's been gearing up for some time. He also has a competitive primary, probably more competitive than the one that Beto O'Rourke is facing March 1st in Texas, that he's got to have to spend some resources to make sure he gets through running against some of those candidates. I think the other factor is maybe Beto fatigue, and we'll have to see when he's got a full quarter under his belt what the numbers look like. But something I've heard from national Democrats as well as some in Texas is we've put our resources and our hopes and ambitions into Beto O'Rourke twice. He came close against Ted Cruz. He didn't come close in a much hyped run for the presidency. Why is that going to be a good use of our money when we've got critical Senate and gubernatorial races elsewhere on the map? You don't want to leave things on the table as a Democrat if ultimately Greg Abbott's going to win re-election anyway. He goes into it as a favorite for re-election. So I think there's some Democratic donors who are probably going to need to be convinced before they give money to Beto O'Rourke, even though they may have done so in 2018 for the Senate race and in 2020 when he ran for president.
We got about 30 seconds left. Where does this race, you think, fit in with other high-profile gubernatorial races like you talked about, particularly Georgia? I mean, will we be seeing the same kind of money here, or is this likely to be the biggest race in the country?
I think Georgia, Florida, Texas, because they're all big, diverse states with a lot of media markets, are all going to be up there in terms of spending. Florida may be maybe even more expensive than Texas, but I think Texas is going to be up there near the top. And, of course, all of those races just closely watched because of the implications on voting rights as well as presidential ambitions.
Rick Klein, political director of ABC News. Thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, Yalitix is celebrating a big one this week, the first episode before a live audience. County judges and commissioners spent 3 days in College Station discussing policy and politics. County judges Glenn Whitley and Eddie Trevino are bipartisan leaders criticizing some of the state's Republican leadership for retreating on the principle that Austin should not tell local governments how to do their job.
You guys carry out what happens from the state level and the federal level, as you mentioned. but we have seen local control being eroded for the past decade or more for a number of different issues. Do you see that changing, reversing course at all?
I believe that as long as you have Dan Patrick as Lieutenant Governor and empowered Texans attempting to try to centralize everything in Austin, you're going to continue to have an attack on local control and on local elected officials. I have said from the very get-go, we've been fighting this back now for over 10 years. Dan Patrick came into office in 2006, or was elected in 2006 to the Texas State Senate. That was the same year Empowered Texans came along, which is primarily the, Tim Dunn, the West Texas oilman, and then now and to some extent the Wilkes brothers. But they seem to be intent upon trying to centralize folks, all the power into Austin, where I believe they feel like they can have more influence on the elected officials there. And I think it's caused a great deal of damage to Texas and the citizens of Texas.
I really don't understand the rancor, resentment that the state officials have towards local officials. We're supposed to be serving the same constituency, regardless of what part of the state we're at. And we've had to spend a lot of our time in the last couple of sessions making sure that as local government officials, whether it's at the county or the city level, we still are allowed to even get heard. They've been trying to legislate us out from allowing us to be heard with our local representatives and senators. So,
but let me ask you this though: when you talk to your local state reps and your local state senators, or if there's a visit from the lieutenant governor or governor, I mean, are you able to get across to them?
Well, I guess I have a little bit of a different issue because the majority of all of our delegation up until recently was all Democrats, so we weren't seeing that necessarily that issue. We had one local state rep who just recently switched parties, but again, we go back a few years ago. That's not the Republican Party that I used to work with, and so this resentment, this issue at the local level, something that Judge Whitley and I have been working on, along with so many others. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me because all we're doing is spinning our wheels and spending a lot of time, energy, and resources where we're not getting anything accomplished. And they're just trying to make sure that, like he said, they have full control in Austin. And that's not, if that was the case, why do you have school boards? Why do you have city commissions? Why do you have county commissions? It just doesn't make any sense.
All right, you can hear the entire interview with County Judges Glenn Whitley and Eddie Trevino on the latest episode of Y'all-Tix. It's a really good one, and it's out now wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up, will Governor Abbott have to spend a lot of his cash to win the GOP primary? And more on the problems plaguing mail-in ballot applications, even in Republican counties. The Reporters Roundtable is next. Time now for the Reporters Roundtable. Get some perspective on the week's news. Ross is here. We got Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and of course Bernadine Steptoe, our great political producer at WFAA. I want to ask you guys some questions about fundraising, particularly the Republican primary. Ross, let's start there. Governor Abbott has a ton of money. Are his challengers getting some traction on money, and does he need to spend some of his money on this race?
He'll need to spend some. He's got Bugs Bunny money. He's got a bazillion simoleons in his account. He can afford to buy all the ads that he wants to between now and the end of voting, which is less than 6 weeks away. Alan West doesn't have that kind of money. Don Huffines does have some money of his own, so he'll be able to compete some. But the firepower on the governor's side is really overpowering.
But, if you drive down 35, you'll see a lot of Huffines billboards and things like that. Is he making some inroads? He's obviously spending money.
Yeah, Huffines can loan himself money, and a lot of his money does come out of his own pocket. Alan West hasn't been able to raise the money to catch up. The one to watch is the other Rick Perry. The Ricky Perry from Springtown is also on the ticket. He's only raised $3,700, but all that came from Tony McDonald from the Empower Texans folks.
And I guess in a larger sense, Bernadine, we got this money we're talking primaries, but the big news this week was that Beto O'Rourke had raised a lot of money in a short amount of time, but that the governor has really so much money on hand, bazillions of dollars, as Ross just said. Do you think we're going to see some closing of that gap, or this is just going to be much more firepower for the governor?
Well, I think that if you look at Beto raised in 46 days, he raised millions of dollars. But one thing that we must look at as well is Abbott has moved on from actually it might be better for Beto because Abbott has sort of moved on from his primary opponents. If you listen to his radio ads, he's attacking Biden and he's attacking Beto. So I think that let's watch Beto because he's only been in raising money less than, a couple of months.
All right, well, that's good. Thank you, Bernadine. Let's talk about mail-in ballots. We've had really a lot of issues this week about rejections, Dallas, Denton, Harris, Travis, even in Tarrant County, where a lot of the early voters there are mostly Republican. Bud, that's where you are. What's the issue here? Is this looking like voter suppression, or is this just sort of administrative problems?
Well, obviously there wouldn't be Republican voter suppression, but it's confusing to voters that they have to fill out these numbers over on the right side of the application. They haven't had to do that before. That's been responsible for part of the applications being returned. At one point, Tarrant County rejected more than half of their applications, and a lot of those voters are going to be Republicans. They're having trouble getting the applications filled out and back.
What do you think, Bernadine? Voter suppression here?
Well, you know what? If it is, Democrats saw it coming, because from the initiation, from beginning, establishing this new voting law, they accused them of voter suppression. So if it is, they saw it coming and they should have dealt with it before it happened.
And Ross, is this playing out exactly as maybe you had expected when this law came through the legislature? Is this what was expected?
Well, yeah, whatever their motives were, the legislature is really good at creating obstacles and putting more friction in a process that ought to be more frictionless. It ought to be easy to vote and ought to be as few things in your way as possible. As they change the law and tinker with the law, They keep adding these extra things.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks, panel. You guys look fantastic. I'm glad I could be here with this week and hope you'll join us next week for Inside Texas Politics. See you later.